The sound of hooves pounding against the hard-packed earth was the only warning Kieran Novak had before the stranger appeared at his doorstep. It was early spring of 1879, the kind of Colorado morning where frost still clung to the window panes even as the sun climbed high above the mountains. Kieran had been alone on this homestead for 3 years, and visitors were rare enough to put him on edge. He set down his coffee mug and reached for the rifle propped against the wall. The knock that came was soft, almost hesitant, not the confident rap of a bandit or tax collector. Still, caution had kept him alive this long. "Who's there?" he called, voice gruff from disuse. "A traveler," came the reply, a woman's voice, thin and wavering. "I'm seeking work, sir." Kieran frowned, rifle still in hand as he unlatched the door and pulled it open just enough to see who stood on his porch. The woman before him was slight, her frame nearly swallowed by a threadbare coat that had seen better days. Her face was pale but proud, dark circles underlining eyes that might once have sparkled. A widow's bonnet covered most of her hair, though a few strands of honey brown escaped around her face. "I don't recall advertising for help," Kieran said, though his tone had softened. The woman's chin lifted slightly. "I'll work for food, sir. Nothing more. I can cook, clean, tend to animals. Whatever you need." Something in her bearing spoke of desperation carefully concealed beneath dignity. Kieran had seen that look before in the mirror, years ago, when he'd first come west with nothing but determination and grief for company. He should turn her away. The last thing he needed was a woman complicating his solitary existence. Yet something held him back from closing the door. "What's your name?" he asked instead. "Hannah," she answered. "Hannah Keller." "You're a long way from anywhere, Mrs. Keller." "Widow Keller," she corrected, her fingers twisting the worn fabric of her skirt. "And yes, I know." The wind picked up, sending a shiver through her slight frame. Kieran noticed she had no horse, just a small bundle at her feet. How far had she walked? And from where? Words formed in his mind before he could think better of them. "I don't need a hired hand, madam." Her shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, but she nodded, reaching for her bundle. "I understand. Thank you for your, but I could use a wife." The words hung between them, surprising him as much as her. Her eyes widened, lips parting in shock. "Sir." Kieran cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his unshaven face and the sorry state of his cabin. "This is no place for charity, Mrs. Keller, but it is a place that needs a woman's touch. I've got food enough for 2, land that's starting to produce, and prospects that are improving." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm offering a fair arrangement. Marriage, protection, food, a roof, in exchange for your help making this place a proper home." Hannah stared at him, searching his face. "You don't know me." "And you don't know me," he countered. "But I'm not in the habit of making offers I don't intend to honor." She glanced past him to the cabin's interior, then out at the surrounding landscape, miles of nothing in every direction. Whatever circumstances had driven her here must have been dire indeed. "You're serious," she said finally. "I am." Hannah drew a deep breath. "May I at least know your name before I agree to marry you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Kieran Novak." "Mr. Novak," she said, testing the name. "I accept your proposal, though I think we're both mad for it." He stepped aside, holding the door open wider. "Then welcome home, Mrs. Novak. Or soon-to-be." Hannah gathered her bundle and stepped across the threshold, bringing with her the scent of wildflowers and the first real change Kieran's life had seen in years. The interior of the cabin was sparse but solid. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs sat in the center, and a narrow bed was pushed against the far corner. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and provisions. It was clean, if utilitarian, the home of a man who valued function over comfort. "It's not much," Kieran said, suddenly self-conscious. Hannah set her bundle down. "It's shelter, and it's clean. I've seen worse. There's only the one bed. I'll sleep by the fire until we're properly married." A flush colored her cheeks. "That's considerate of you." An awkward silence fell between them. Kieran ran a hand through his dark hair, unsure of what to do with this woman who was now, for all intents and purposes, his fiancée. "Are you hungry?" he finally asked. "Yes," she admitted. "Very." He nodded and moved to the fireplace, where a pot of beans had been simmering. "It's simple fare. Simple is fine. Hannah removed her bonnet, revealing more of that honey-brown hair, pulled back in a practical bun. Without the bonnet shadowing her face, Kieran could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or so, not much younger than his own 30 years. He served her a bowl of beans and a chunk of cornbread, watching as she struggled to eat slowly, with dignity, when hunger clearly gnawed at her. How long had it been since she'd eaten properly? Town's a 2-day ride, he said as she ate. Preacher comes through once a month. He'll be by in about 2 weeks. Hannah paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. You mean to wait until then to marry? Unless you'd prefer we ride to town. She shook her head. No, 2 weeks is fine. She hesitated. Mr. Novak, Kieran, he corrected. Kieran, I should tell you I have no dowry, no family. Nothing to bring to this marriage except myself and my labor. I didn't ask for more. She studied him, as if trying to divine his true intentions. Most men would. I'm not most men. He rose, retrieving a tin cup and filling it with coffee. And I suspect you've had your fill of most men, or you wouldn't be here. Hannah accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. My husband died 2 years ago. Fever. We had a small farm near Denver. And you lost it? Taxes. Debts. Bad luck. Her fingers tightened around the cup. I tried working in town, but the unspoken words hung in the air. A young widow alone had few respectable options, and the disrespectable ones came with costs too high to bear. You don't need to explain, Kieran said quietly. I want to be clear, she insisted. I'm not running from the law. I've done nothing shameful. I simply ran out of choices. And yet you walked away rather than take the easy path. Her eyes met his, a flash of steel in them. Some paths aren't worth taking, no matter how easy they seem. Kieran felt a surge of respect. This woman had backbone. Well, Mrs. Keller, you found a new path now. It won't be easy either, but it will be honest. Thank you. She finished her meal and set the bowl aside. Now, if you'll show me what needs doing, I'd like to earn my keep starting today. Kieran suppressed a smile. Yes, backbone indeed. The following days established a cautious rhythm between them. Hannah took to the domestic duties with quiet efficiency, transforming the functional cabin into something that began to feel like a home. She found stores of preserved goods Kieran had nearly forgotten about, creating meals that, while simple, were far better than his own cooking. For his part, Kieran showed her the workings of the homestead, the small herd of cattle, the vegetable garden just beginning to sprout, the chicken coop, and the stream that provided their water. He was surprised by her knowledge of farming, though he supposed he shouldn't have been, given her background. Your land has good potential, she observed on the third day, as they walked the perimeter of the property. The soil here is rich. That's what drew me to it, Kieran admitted. That and the water rights. You chose well. He glanced at her, noting how the sun brought out golden highlights in her hair. She'd stopped wearing the widow's bonnet, though she still dressed in the plain, dark clothes she'd arrived in. And you? Did you choose well coming here? Hannah met his gaze, her expression thoughtful. I think so, though time will tell. Each night, true to his word, Kieran made his bed by the fire while Hannah took the bed. Each morning, he woke to find her already up, coffee brewing and bread baking. They spoke little of personal matters, focusing instead on the work at hand, learning to navigate around each other in the small space. On the 5th day, Kieran returned from checking the herd to find Hannah standing on a chair, attempting to hang curtains made from what looked like one of her own skirts. What are you doing? He asked, startling her. She turned, nearly losing her balance before he stepped forward to steady her. Making curtains. The afternoon sun is fierce through this window. His hand lingered on her arm a moment longer than necessary before he pulled away. You shouldn't have sacrificed your clothing. I didn't have much use for a second skirt anyway. She finished securing the fabric, then stepped down. Besides, it brightens the place, don't you think? Kieran looked around the cabin, noticing for the first time how much had changed in less than a week. The rough table now bore a covering made from flour sacks she'd bleached and sewn together. His books, once scattered, were arranged neatly on the shelves. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a small vase of wildflowers sat by the bed. It does, he agreed, feeling something shift inside him. Thank you. Hannah smiled a real smile that reached her eyes, and for a moment, Kieran forgot to breathe. That night, After supper, they sat by the fire as a spring storm rattled the windows. Hannah was darning one of his socks, her head bent over her work, needle flashing in the firelight. "Tell me about your husband," Kieran said suddenly. Her hand stilled. "Why do you want to know?" "Because in 9 days you'll be my wife, and I know next to nothing about you." Hannah resumed her stitching, though more slowly. "His name was Thomas. He was a good man. Kind. We were married for years." "Did you love him?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Yes. Not in the wild, passionate way of novels, but steadily. He was my friend before he was my husband." Kieran nodded, understanding that kind of affection. "Any children?" Pain flickered across her face. "No. We tried, but it wasn't meant to be. I'm sorry." She tied off her thread and set the mended sock aside. "And you? Have you ever been married?" "No. But you must have been close, at some point. Most men your age have at least been engaged." Kieran stared into the fire. "There was someone back east. Elizabeth. We were to be married, but she died. Influenza." "I'm sorry." Hannah echoed his earlier sentiment. "Is that why you came west?" "Partly. There was nothing left for me there." He paused. "My parents were already gone. No siblings. I thought a fresh start might help." "Did it?" He considered the question. "It gave me purpose. Work. A future to build toward." His eyes found hers across the small space. "But it's been a lonely future." Hannah held his gaze. "Loneliness is its own kind of pain." "Yes," he agreed softly. "It is." The storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the sky. Hannah shivered despite the fire's warmth. "Are you cold?" Kieran asked. "A little. Storms always make me uneasy." Without thinking, he moved to sit beside her on the bench, his larger frame blocking some of the draft. "Better." She nodded, not pulling away from his proximity. "Yes, thank you." They sat in silence, watching the fire, aware of each other in a way they hadn't been before. When Hannah finally rose to go to bed, her hand brushed his shoulder briefly. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Hannah." He stayed by the fire long after she had fallen asleep, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing beneath the storm's wrath. The following morning broke clear and fresh, the storm having washed everything clean. Kieran woke to find Hannah already outside, assessing the damage. A few fence posts had come down, and a branch had fallen near the chicken coop, but otherwise, the homestead had weathered the tempest well. "We were fortunate," she said as he joined her, handing him a cup of coffee. "We were," he agreed, accepting the cup. Their fingers touched in the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. "I'll fix the fence this morning. I'll help. For hands make quicker work than two." They worked side by side under the brightening sky, repairing what the storm had damaged. Hannah proved as capable outside as she was within the cabin, handling tools with confidence and offering suggestions that showed her farming experience. By midday, they had completed most of the repairs. Kieran watched as Hannah drove a final nail into a fence post, her face flushed with exertion, a smudge of dirt across one cheek. Something tightened in his chest at the sight. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "You surprise me," he admitted. Now she did look up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "How so?" "You're stronger than you appear." A smile quirked the corner of her mouth. "Most women are, Mr. Novak. Men just rarely notice." He laughed, the sound surprising both of them. "Fair point." They finished the work and returned to the cabin for the midday meal. As they ate, Kieran found himself wondering what it would be like once they were properly married. Would she warm to him? Would they find more than just a practical arrangement in their union? "I need to ride to the north pasture this afternoon," he said. "Would you like to come? I could show you more of the property." Hannah's eyes lit up. "I would, yes. If you have a horse I could ride?" "Daisy is gentle enough. She's no spirited thoroughbred, but she'll get you there and back safely." An hour later, they set out together, Hannah perched atop the placid mare, while Kieran rode his more temperamental gelding, Thunder. The day had turned gloriously warm, the storm's passage leaving behind a vibrant landscape of fresh green and wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Hannah said as they crested a rise, looking out over the valley below. The mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite the season. "It is," Kieran agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the view. The ride had brought color to her cheeks, and with her hair coming loose from its pins, she looked younger, more carefree than he'd seen her. They continued on, Kieran pointing out landmarks and boundaries, Hannah asking questions about the cattle and his plans for expansion. They stopped by a small stream to let the horses drink, dismounting to stretch their legs. How did you learn so much about ranching? Hannah asked as they walked along the stream bank. Trial and error, mostly. And books. I was a lawyer back east, not a farmer. She looked surprised. A lawyer? That's quite a change. I wanted something real. Tangible. He picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. Law was all words and paper. Out here, you live or die by what you can do with your hands. And what you can build, Hannah added, watching the ripples spread from his stone. Yes. He turned to her. What about you? What did you want before life took you in a different direction? She considered the question, her gaze distant. A home, children, security. A small smile touched her lips. Simple dreams, I suppose. Not simple. Essential. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared longing. The moment was broken by a distant rumble. Kieran frowned, looking skyward, but the blue expanse was clear of clouds. That wasn't thunder, Hannah said, alert now. No. Sounded like the rumble came again, louder. Horses. A lot of them. They hurried back to their mounts, climbing quickly into the saddles. Kieran led them to higher ground, where they could see without being seen. In the valley below, a group of riders, at least a dozen, moved at a gallop toward the direction of the cabin. Raiders? Hannah asked, her voice tight. Kieran's jaw clenched. Or worse, cattle thieves. He turned to her. We need to get back, but not directly. We'll circle around. They rode hard, taking a circuitous route that kept them concealed by the rolling landscape. Kieran's mind raced. He had a rifle at the cabin, but against a dozen men? The odds weren't good. As they approached the homestead, they slowed, dismounting in a copse of trees that afforded a view of the cabin. 7 men on horseback circled the property, while others had dismounted and were searching the cabin and outbuildings. Thieves for certain, Kieran muttered. Looking for valuables, probably. And they'll take the cattle too. Hannah's hand found his arm. What do we do? He covered her hand with his. Wait. Let them take what they want and go. It's not worth risking our lives. But this is your home, everything you've built. Things can be rebuilt. Lives can't. They watched in tense silence as the men ransacked the cabin, emerging with Kieran's few valuables: a pocket watch, a silver picture frame, the small lockbox where he kept what little cash he had. One man carried out Hannah's bundle, discarding it after finding nothing of value. After what seemed an eternity, the leader, a tall man with a distinctive red bandana, gave a signal. The men mounted up, and to Kieran's relief, they rode off without the cattle, apparently deciding the small herd wasn't worth the effort of driving. They waited until the riders were well out of sight before approaching the cabin. The interior was in disarray, furniture overturned, Kieran's books scattered, food stores dumped on the floor. Hannah's carefully arranged wildflowers lay crushed, the vase shattered. Kieran surveyed the damage with a grim expression. They took what little money I had. And my grandfather's watch. Hannah bent to retrieve a fallen book. At least we're safe. And they didn't burn anything. He looked at her, struck by her resilience. You're taking this remarkably well. She shrugged, already beginning to right the overturned table. This isn't the first time I've had to start over, Kieran. Together, they set about restoring order to the chaos. It was painstaking work, but by nightfall, the cabin was habitable again, if not completely restored. They ate a simple meal of what provisions remained, both too exhausted for much conversation. As Hannah prepared for bed, Kieran checked and rechecked the door and windows, his usual calm demeanor edged with tension. They won't come back, Hannah said softly. They got what they wanted. Probably not. But I'll feel better keeping watch tonight, all the same. She hesitated, then said, There's room in the bed. For both of us. Just to sleep, she added quickly, color rising in her cheeks. But you need rest too. Kieran stared at her, surprised by the offer. Are you certain? Yes. It's practical. And I'd feel safer. He nodded slowly. All right. They lay side by side in the narrow bed, a respectful space between them despite the close quarters. Kieran remained on top of the blankets while Hannah lay beneath them, both still fully clothed. When I was little, Hannah said into the darkness, My father would tell me that bad things sometimes happen to make way for good things. Wise man, your father. I hope he was right. She turned her head to look at him, her profile silvered by moonlight through the window. Do you think good will come of this? Kieran considered her question, aware of her warmth beside him, the subtle scent of wildflowers that somehow clung to her despite everything. I think it already has. He felt rather than saw her smile. Good night, Kieran. Good night, Hannah. In the days that followed, they fell into a new rhythm. The raid had changed something between them, breaking down some of the careful distance they'd maintained. They worked together to restore the homestead, their conversations flowing more easily, their silences comfortable rather than strained. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Kieran found himself telling Hannah about his life before Colorado, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his years at university, his brief career in law. She listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. In turn, she shared stories of her own upbringing in Ohio, her marriage to Thomas, their struggles and small joys on their farm. She spoke of her parents, both gone now, and the brother she'd lost in the war. We're both alone in the world, Kieran observed. Hannah's gaze was steady. Not anymore. The preacher arrived on the appointed day, a weather-beaten man named Reverend Wilson who traveled a circuit of isolated homesteads and small settlements. He seemed unsurprised by the arrangement, having seen similar practical unions throughout the frontier. Marriage is a serious covenant, he told them as they stood before him in the cabin, entered into not lightly, but with due consideration. Kieran looked at Hannah, wondering if she had reconsidered during these 2 weeks of living under his roof. Her face was solemn but composed, her simple blue dress the best she owned, making her eyes appear more blue than gray in the afternoon light. Do you, Kieran Novak, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The Reverend asked. I do, Kieran said, his voice steady. And do you, Hannah Keller, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Hannah's eyes met Kieran's. I do. The rings. Kieran produced a simple gold band, his mother's, one of the few possessions he'd brought west that the thieves hadn't taken. He slipped it onto Hannah's finger, surprised to find his own hand trembling slightly. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The Reverend closed his Bible. You may kiss your bride. Kieran hesitated, suddenly aware that this would be their first physical contact beyond the casual touch of hands or arms. Hannah looked up at him, a question in her eyes that he couldn't quite decipher. Gently, he bent and pressed his lips to hers in a brief, chaste kiss. But as he began to pull away, her hand came up to rest against his chest, and she leaned into him, extending the moment into something more meaningful than mere ceremony. When they parted, a flush had risen to her cheeks, and Kieran felt an answering warmth spread through him. Congratulations, the Reverend said, seemingly oblivious to the moment that had just passed between them. Now, I hate to perform a ceremony and run, but I need to reach the Peterson place by nightfall. They thanked him, offering what hospitality they could before he continued on his journey. When he was gone, Kieran and Hannah stood in the cabin, now husband and wife in truth, an expectant silence between them. Well, Mrs. Novak, Kieran said finally, it seems we've done it. Hannah twisted the ring on her finger, a small smile playing about her lips. So we have, Mr. Novak. That night, after a wedding supper more festive than their usual fare, they faced the question of sleeping arrangements with new awareness. Kieran had built a screen for privacy during the previous week, but the cabin's small size made true privacy impossible. I won't press you, he said quietly as Hannah stood by the bed, her back to him. Nothing needs to change until you're ready. She turned, meeting his gaze. And if I am ready? The directness of her question took him by surprise. Are you? Hannah approached him slowly. We are married now. And I've grown fond of you, Kieran. Fond, he repeated, a hint of disappointment in his tone. Perhaps more than fond. She stopped before him, close enough that he could see the pulse beating at the base of her throat. I came here seeking food and shelter. I didn't expect to find someone I could respect, someone I could care for. Kieran reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't expect you at all, Hannah Novak. But now I can't imagine this place without you. Her eyes softened at his words. Then perhaps we should begin our marriage in truth. Later, As moonlight spilled through the curtains Hannah had made, Kieran held his wife against his chest, marveling at the turn his life had taken. One knock on his door, one impulsive offer, and everything had changed. "What are you thinking?" Hannah murmured, her breath warm against his skin. "That I'm the luckiest man in Colorado territory." She laughed softly. "Because you got a housekeeper who works for room and board?" He tightened his arms around her. "Because I found a partner, a friend, and maybe, someday, love." Hannah raised herself on one elbow to look down at him. "Maybe not someday," she said softly. "Maybe already." Kieran's heart seemed to skip a beat. "Hannah," she placed a finger against his lips. "I know it's fast. I know we're still learning each other. But I think what's growing between us is real." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I think so too." As spring gave way to summer, and summer to fall, the Novak homestead flourished under their joint care. The small cattle herd grew, the garden yielded a bountiful harvest, and the cabin itself expanded as Kieran added a proper bedroom and enlarged the main living area. Hannah proved to be not just a capable homemaker, but a skilled gardener and a shrewd business partner. When Kieran took their excess produce to the nearest town, it was her careful accounting that ensured they got fair prices. With the proceeds, they purchased more cattle, better tools, and luxuries like coffee and sugar that had once seemed extravagant. Their marriage deepened too, moving beyond practical partnership to genuine affection and, yes, love. Kieran found himself watching Hannah as she moved about their home, still sometimes amazed that fate had brought her to his door. One crisp October morning, as they sat at breakfast, Hannah set down her coffee cup with unusual solemnity. "I have something to tell you," she said. Kieran looked up from his plate, immediately concerned by her tone. "What is it? Are you unwell?" A smile broke across her face, radiant and a bit tremulous. "No, not unwell. Just expecting." For a moment, he stared at her uncomprehendingly. Then understanding dawned. "Expecting? You mean a baby?" "Yes." Her hands moved protectively to her still flat stomach. "In the spring." Kieran was around the table in an instant, kneeling beside her chair, his hands covering hers. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." Tears shimmered in Hannah's eyes. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased?" He laughed, the sound full of joy. "Hannah, I'm overjoyed." He sobered slightly. "But you, after what you told me about before, are you afraid?" She shook her head. "Not with you beside me. We'll face whatever comes together." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and hope into the gesture. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "When you knocked on my door that day, I had no idea you were bringing my whole future with you. And when I asked to work for food, I never imagined I'd find a home. A true home. We found each other," Kieran said simply. "And now we'll build a family." The winter that followed was harsh, with blizzards that kept them housebound for days at a time. But inside their sturdy cabin, warmth prevailed. Kieran insisted Hannah rest more, taking on additional chores despite her protests. He read to her in the evenings poetry, novels, anything to pass the long winter nights. As Hannah's body changed with the growing child, Kieran found new reasons to love her strength, her occasional moments of vulnerability, the way she hummed to the baby when she thought he couldn't hear. Spring arrived with its usual tumult of mud and renewal. The cattle delivered healthy calves, the garden began to sprout, and Hannah's time drew near. Kieran arranged for the midwife from town to stay with them, pacing anxiously as the woman examined his wife. "Everything looks fine," the midwife assured him. "Another few weeks, I'd say." But babies, like spring storms, follow their own timetable. Hannah's labor began 3 days later, in the middle of the night. Kieran rode for the midwife with a speed that left thunder winded, returning to find Hannah pale but determined, already well into her labor. The hours that followed tested them both. Kieran alternated between feeling helpless and terrified as Hannah battled through pain he could neither share nor ease. He held her hand, wiped her brow, murmured encouragement that seemed woefully inadequate against her suffering. As dawn broke over the mountains, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed impossible from such a tiny being. The midwife placed the swaddled infant in Hannah's arms, and Kieran, looking down at his wife and child, felt a love so overwhelming it nearly brought him to his knees. "She's perfect," Hannah whispered, her exhausted face transformed by joy. Like her mother, Kieran said, his voice rough with emotion. They named her Emma Rose Novak, Emma for Kieran's mother, Rose for the wild roses that had been blooming when Hannah first arrived at the cabin. As spring melted into summer, their little family settled into a new rhythm. Emma thrived, growing plumper and more alert by the day. Hannah recovered her strength, though she insisted on returning to her duties sooner than Kieran would have liked. "I'm a farmer's wife, not a china doll," she told him with fond exasperation when he suggested she rest longer. "You're my wife," he corrected, dropping a kiss on her forehead as he took Emma from her arms. "And I intend to keep you both safe and well." One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Emma asleep in her cradle beside them, Hannah took Kieran's hand. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "When I appeared at your door?" "Often." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Why? I was so desperate, so afraid. I had walked for days, been turned away from so many places." She gazed out at the land they had nurtured together. "And then I found you. Or you found me. We found each other," Kieran said, echoing his words from months before. Hannah nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I asked to work for food, and you offered me a life instead. Best decision I ever made." He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her closer. "Though I still think we were both a bit mad." She laughed softly. "Desperate times call for desperate measures, Mr. Novak. I prefer to think of it as recognizing an opportunity when it knocked on my door." Hannah lifted her face to his, her eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "I love you, Kieran. Not just for taking me in when I had nowhere else to go, but for the man you are. The husband and father you've become." Kieran kissed her, slow and tender, before answering. "And I love you, Hannah. Not for what you do, but for who you are. The woman who brought warmth and purpose back into my life." Emma stirred in her cradle, making the small mewling sounds that heralded waking. Hannah moved to attend to her, lifting the baby with practiced ease. As Kieran watched his wife and daughter silhouetted against the fading light, he thought about the unlikely path that had led them here. A widow's knock, a cowboy's answer. And between them, a future neither could have imagined, built on need, but transformed by love. "Come inside," Hannah said, Emma cradled against her chest. "It's getting cool." Kieran rose, following the two people who had become his world. As he closed the door behind them, shutting out the gathering dusk, he sent a silent prayer of gratitude into the vast Colorado sky for desperate chances taken, for impulsive offers made, and for the love that had blossomed in their wake.